Imagine you're buying a car,
Right.
right?
It's stressful already.
Yeah, exactly. You're sitting at that little desk, you've taken the test drive, the new car smell is, still in your nose, and the salesperson looks you right in the eye and says, "Tell you what, you buy this car today, and I will throw in free car washes for life."
Which sounds like an amazing deal.
Right. It sounds amazing. So you shake hands, you sign like the mountain of paperwork they always have, and you drive off. But then a month later, you roll up for your free wash, and the manager just looks at you blankly.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you pull out your contract, and guess what? That promise of free car washes isn't written anywhere on those pages. So the question is, does their verbal promise actually count?
And the really painful answer is, no, it generally doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the exact legal mechanism that allows them to get away with that. And our mission today is taking a really dense legal concept about contract law and translating it entirely into simple, everyday English.
Which is so important because, everyone signs contracts, leases, car loans, employment agreements.
Exactly. We all do it. So we're going to keep the language incredibly simple today, and we're going to stop and recap often so you, the listener, never get lost.
I love that. And the mechanism we're talking about today, the one from our sources, is called the parole evidence rule.
The parole evidence rule.
Right. And I know that sounds like really dense legal jargon, but the stakes here are fundamentally about trust. It's about trust in written words.
Because if we could always just, argue about what was said over a handshake before we sign the final document, then written contracts become completely meaningless, right?
Exactly. We'd just be living in this constant state of he said, she said. And if society's going to function, a judge can't be asked to sort through like 1,000 conflicting memories of a conversation.
Yeah, that would be a nightmare. Okay, so let's unpack this. General rule first. What is parole evidence?
So parole in this context basically just means outside evidence or, prior talk.
Like a car wash promise.
Right. It's the conversations, the emails, the text messages, the handshake promises that happened before the final contract was signed.
So the general rule is that those prior conversations just vanish.
Pretty much. The rule states that if all the terms of an agreement are completely finalized into a written document, you cannot bring up earlier promises to contradict that written paper.
Okay, hold on. Let me push back on that a little bit. Because nobody reads every single line of a 50-page contract. Like, are we just pretending humans are perfect reading machines? What if the other person is just a really fast talker who distracted me while I signed?
It is harsh, absolutely. But it's actually, it's a form of behavioral engineering.
Behavioral engineering.
Yeah. The law isn't pretending humans are perfect. The law is intentionally being strict to force people to build better habits.
Oh, I see. So it's basically the legal system's way of forcing us to eat our vegetables, like read the contract or pay the price.
That's a really good way to put it. Because if the law easily forgave you for not getting the car wash promise in writing, nobody would ever bother writing anything down accurately.
Right, we'd just rely on sloppy memories. Okay, time for our first quick recap. Rule number 1, the final written paper is king. You cannot use old conversations to argue against what is written on the final page.
Spot on. And this brings us to a concept lawyers call the four corners of the agreement.
The four corners, literally the edges of the paper.
Exactly. When a judge looks at a dispute, they generally only look at what is inside the four corners of that physical page. They don't want to hear about the fast-talking salesperson.
They just look at the ink.
Just the ink.
Okay, but this strict rule, it only makes sense if both people actually meant for that piece of paper to be the final word, right? Like, what if I just jotted some notes on a coffee shop napkin?
Right, you didn't mean for a napkin to be a locked-in official contract.
Oh, wait.
And that is the exact nuance the courts look for. In law, this concept of whether the paper is the final word is called integration.
Integration. Okay, keeping with our simple English theme, how does integration actually work in real life?
Think of it as how complete the document is. So first you have total integration.
Total integration.
Yeah. This means the piece of paper is the 100% complete deal. Nothing was left out. If a contract is totally integrated, the door is completely shut. You cannot bring in any outside evidence at all.
Got it. And what's the alternative?
Partial integration. This means the document is final as far as it goes, but both sides knew some details were left out.
Okay, let me see if I can ground that in a real-world example. Say I agree to buy a used truck from you, right?
Okay.
We write down on a piece of paper, I will buy this specific truck for $10,000, and we both sign it. but we totally forgot to write down when I'm going to actually pick it up. That would be partial integration.
Precisely. It's final regarding the price and the truck itself, but it's incomplete regarding the delivery date.
So the law cracks the door open a little bit.
Exactly. Because it's only partially integrated, you are allowed to bring in outside evidence to supplement the contract. So like a text message from the day before where we agreed on a Tuesday pickup.
But wait, I couldn't bring in a text message saying you actually agreed to sell it to me for $9,000, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. You can add missing details to a partially integrated contract, but you can never, ever use outside evidence to contradict what is already written inside those four corners.
The written $10,000 trumps the texted $9,000 every single time.
Every time.
That makes a lot of sense. But without reading our minds, how does a judge actually know if we intended the document to be totally complete?
That is where lawyers use a very specific tool. It's called a merger clause.
A merger clause, what is that exactly?
It's a sentence, usually shoved at the very end of a long contract, that explicitly states the intent. It'll say something like, this document represents the entire agreement between the parties and supersedes all prior understandings.
Oh, it's basically a this is it sentence.
Yes, a this is it sentence. It literally tells the judge, hey, we put everything we care about on this piece of paper, and nothing else counts.
Okay, time for another quick recap. If a contract has a this is it clause, a merger clause, the door is completely shut on adding outside promises. If it doesn't, the door might be cracked open just enough to add missing details, as long as they don't contradict the writing.
That's a perfect summary. Now, as rigid as all this sounds, the law isn't totally blind to reality. Sometimes enforcing the written paper perfectly would actually be, well, really unfair.
Right, because scammers could just use contracts as like impenetrable shields.
Exactly. So there are a few very specific exceptions where outside talk is allowed, even if the contract looks fully finalized.
Okay, let's explore those. When can we break the four corners rule?
The first major exception is for ambiguity.
Meaning confusing words.
Right. Sometimes the problem isn't that a promise was left out. It's that the words actually written on the page are genuinely confusing, or they could mean two different things. In that case, you can bring in outside talk to explain what the word means.
Because you aren't contradicting the contract. You're just like handing the judge a dictionary based on your past conversations.
That's a great way to view it. The second exception is for defenses, specifically things like fraud.
Oh, to prove someone lied to you?
Yes, what the law calls fraud in the inducement. So if someone hands you a contract for a gold watch and you sign it.
But I find out later it's made of plastic.
Exactly. The fact that the contract says watch doesn't protect them if they verbally assured you for weeks it was 24 karat gold.
Okay, so the signature itself was kind of tainted by the lie.
Right. The court has to look at outside evidence, like those verbal assurances, to see if the contract is even legally valid. You can't use a rule meant to protect agreements to protect a lie.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
The third exception is for totally separate deals. If the outside talk represents a distinct, separate contract that just happened to be discussed at the same time, you can bring it up.
Because it's basically running on a parallel track.
Exactly. It doesn't clash with the main contract.
Yeah.
And the fourth major exception is something called a condition precedent.
A condition precedent. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I'm going to guess this has to do with things needing to happen in a specific order.
You're on the right track.
So, like a secret password. Say we write a contract where I agree to buy your umbrella for $20, but we verbally agreed before signing. This written contract only counts if it rains tomorrow. Is the rain the condition precedent?
Yes, that is a perfect analogy. The law views a condition precedent as a hurdle that must be cleared before the written document even springs into existence.
So if it's sunny the next day, and you try to force me to buy the umbrella, I can bring up our verbal conversation about the rain.
You can. And what's fascinating here is that you aren't contradicting the contract. You aren't arguing the price was actually $15. You are proving the contract never activated in the first place.
Wow. Okay, quick recap of the exceptions. You still can't contradict the contract, but you can bring in outside talk to explain confusing words, prove a lie, show a separate deal, or prove a condition like the rain wasn't met.
You nailed it. But you might have noticed a theme here with all of these rules.
Yeah.
Everything we've discussed so far is entirely focused on things said before or during the signing of the paper.
Right. It's all about past conversations. But what happens if we sign the contract, the ink dries, and then, like, a week later we have a new conversation?
That is a crucial distinction. The parole evidence rule absolutely does not apply to agreements made subsequent or after the writing.
Because the contract can't predict the future.
Exactly. Our sources provided a really clean example of this involving a handyman. Let's call him Handyman Eric.
Okay, Handyman Eric.
So Eric has a written, signed, totally integrated contract to refinish a deck for $300. The ink is dry. A week later, while he's at the house working, the homeowner verbally asks him, "Hey, could you also fix the broken gutter? I'll give you $60 extra."
And Eric, being a helpful guy, fixes the garter.
Right. But then the homeowner refuses to pay the $60 and points to the original written contract, saying, look, it has a merger clause. You can't bring in outside evidence of our gutter conversation.
Oh, so the homeowner is trying to use the rule to get free work, but they'd lose that argument, right? Because of the timeline.
Exactly. Because the homeowner asked for the gutter fix after the original $300 contract was made, the rule simply doesn't apply. Eric can absolutely introduce outside evidence to get his $60.
So the past is blocked, but the future is open.
Okay.
Okay, rule check for the listener. Outside evidence is perfectly fine if it's about a brand new agreement made after the original contract.
Spot on. Now, before we move off general contracts, there's one more really interesting nuance from the restatement of contracts. It's about different meanings.
Oh, like if we define words differently.
Yeah. Imagine two people sign a contract, but they secretly attach totally different meanings to a specific term. Say the contract says the job must be done fast. Party A thinks fast means within a week. Party B thinks fast means within a month.
That just sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
It is. Now, imagine Party A is completely clueless about Party B's weird, month-long definition, but Party B knows that Party A expects the job done in a week.
Wait, so Party B realizes the misunderstanding but just stays quiet?
Yes. They just smile and sign the paper anyway, hoping to buy themselves more time.
That is incredibly sneaky.
It is. But the law anticipates this. The rule states that if parties attach different meanings to a term, and one person knows about the confusion and stays quiet, the innocent party's meaning wins.
Oh, wow. So Party A's expectation of 1 week legally controls the contract.
Exactly. The court essentially punishes the party who tried to be sneaky.
I love that. So if someone knows you are misunderstanding a word and stays quiet, your understanding wins. That's a great rule.
It's very satisfying. Now, everything we've talked about so far covers general contracts, services, real estate, employment. But there is a special, slightly looser rule book just for buying and selling physical goods.
Physical goods, so like not handymen or real estate, but ordering inventory.
Right. Buying and selling physical goods falls under something called the Uniform Commercial Code, or the UCC, specifically UCC Section 2202.
And why does it need its own rule book?
Because commerce moves so fast. If businesses had to write 50-page, totally integrated contracts for every single daily transaction, the economy would just grind to a halt.
That makes sense. So how are the rules looser under the UCC?
Well, you still can't blatantly contradict the writing, but it is much easier to explain or supplement the contract using outside context. You don't even need to prove the contract was only partially integrated first.
What kind of context are we talking about?
Things like trade usage, which means standard industry habits, or course of dealings, which is how you've done business together in the past. You can use all of this to add consistent extra terms unless the contract explicitly says it is complete and exclusive.
Okay, let's test this with an analogy. Say I own a bakery,
Okay, bakery.
and I order a baker's dozen of eggs from a local farm every single week. We just have a basic contract that says I pay for a dozen eggs.
A classic scenario.
If a dispute arises under strict contract law, a judge might look at the word dozen inside the four corners of that paper and say, a dozen is 12, case closed. But under the UCC, I could argue differently, right?
You absolutely could.
I could use our course of dealing, the fact that for 3 years this farm has always sent me 13 eggs. And I could use trade usage, the fact that in the baking industry, a baker's dozen is literally universally understood to be 13.
Exactly. You are using the established habits of your specific relationship to explain what the contract actually means. Because it's a sale of goods, the UCC is highly welcoming to that outside evidence, as long as it doesn't directly contradict the fundamental written agreement.
Okay, final recap for this section. When buying or selling physical goods, the rules relax slightly. You can use industry habits and past relationships to explain what the contract means, as long as it doesn't directly contradict the written words.
Perfect.
All right, we've covered a ton of ground today. It is time for the grand recap of the entire deep dive.
Let's hear it.
Number 1, if a contract is fully written within the 4 corners, past promises cannot contradict it. Number 2, a "this is it" clause or merger clause completely seals the deal.
Yep.
Number 3, you can bring in outside talk to explain confusing words, prove fraud, or prove deals made after the signing. And finally, number 4, selling physical goods allows for industry customs to help explain terms.
That is an excellent summary. And if we connect this to the bigger picture for the listener, it all comes down to this. Whenever you sign a document, make sure every verbal promise you care about is actually written on the page before you sign. The law heavily favors the ink over the echo of a conversation.
The ink over the echo. I like that. So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think back to that restatement rule we discussed earlier.
The anti-sneaky rule.
Yes, the anti-sneaky rule, where we learned that if one person knows the other is misunderstanding a term, the innocent person's meaning automatically wins.
Right.
This actually raises a really interesting question about negotiation strategy. We're often taught that having a great poker face is the key to business, right? Don't show your hand, don't interrupt if the other side is making a mistake.
Just let them be wrong.
Exactly. But based on this legal mechanic, does this mean staying completely silent when you realize the other side is confused is actually a massive legal liability?
It absolutely does. It's fascinating. It suggests that it might actually be legally safer to correct someone's misunderstanding right then and there, rather than quietly trying to take advantage of it. Being honest might actually be the most self-serving thing you can do.
It's a great paradox to think about.
Definitely something to ponder the next time you're sitting across a negotiating table. And certainly something to remember the next time a salesperson promises you free car washes for life. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Always remember to read the fine print, and we'll catch you next time.